the time that it occupies on the road, right? And set that rent that is a function of demand and supply, right? So supply is the sort of capacity of the road, demand is how much traffic is flowing through it, right?
But the two cases seem analogous to me, at least initial reading. The rental and the real estate example. Because in the case of real estate, for how much time I choose to live there is a function of purely my choices and my decisions.
Okay.
But in the case that I'm driving on the road, the time for which I'm on the road seems to be a function of not just my choices, like which route I take, what time I go at, but also a function of multiple other things that might not be under my control.
Absolutely.
The biggest thing, for example, being the infrastructure of roads, which is directly in the hands of the government.
Sure.
So why would I pay higher if public service delivery, for example, in my area is just not up to the mark?
It's a fair point. You could take a different route, for example, right? You could take a different route. So again, the point is very simple, that you're occupying that amount of public space, right? The space could be priced differently depending on how many people want to use it or not. You have the choice of using less space or more space, and for less time or more time.
So more than tax, you're thinking of it as an incentive or penalty to control.
Correct. Right. So you're charging rent essentially, and this is just a conceptual framework to think about it, right? You can how you implement it is a sort of say, right? So abstractly, what I'm saying is simply think of a vehicle. Every second that the vehicle is on the road, it is occupying certain amount of space for a certain amount of time, and you should charge it a certain amount of rent for that, right? And that rent is because it's per square foot. Bigger vehicles will charge bigger rent and will charge more rent for occupying space, right? So it's like a map of some part of Delhi I'm missing, right? And so you can have essentially you can model this entire road network as a graph, and every edge of this graph has some capacity, which is how much flow it can hold, and it has some tax or some rent, which is a function of space and time, right? And so different roads, different stretches of road can have less or can independently define this function. So this function is per stretch of road, right? And you can model traffic as sort of flows between these nodes in this graph, right? And as a function of these flows, you have some sort of transit time for every edge, right? For traffic to go through, because that. Okay. I guess we're really like there's a hard stop here. Is there a way I can still? I think the first half of the talk was very engaging. So.
I had a question in the meantime. So about the second point where you mentioned higher taxes for bigger cars, what were the? I don't think you were able to elaborate on that, and what were the problems or whatever with that? And putting higher taxes on cars in general, irrespective of their sizes. What's the problem with that approach for congestion?
Oh, the problem is very simple. So at least the way these things are often done, a Maruti 800 and a Toyota Fortuner pay the exact same in Singapore or in London or most other places. The parking space is defined as a specific rectangle, when it's 2.5 meters by 5 meters, which is the international standard parking space. So now, if I have a small car, I get no benefit for having a small car, right? So you're saying all cars are essentially equal. So you're encouraging people to drive as big a car as they can while getting away with the same toll or same congestion charge. So that is the distinction I'm trying to draw. And the difference in sizes is big enough that it's worth accounting.
I just say one thing here. It's 2:45 already.
Yeah.
So if you have to leave for whatever reason, please go ahead. Nobody will be offended. If you're willing to stay on, please stay on.
I think the question was that at the very start, when we were talking about imposing higher penalties by doing something like GST, where there's only one-time penalty at the purchase, why does that policy fail? Or why does it not get the desired outcomes? Is that your question?
Oh, was that the question?
That's the question.
Yeah, so making the cars less accessible in general. And so what's the...
Well, I'm guessing that so these taxes are progressive, right? So you see the bigger vehicles have higher higher taxes.
Meters and above in India.
Sorry.
4 meters is the
4
cutoff.
meters exactly. It's like some arbitrary thing like that, and then there is a cess, so extra surcharge or extra taxes. All I can tell you is that from my reading, it doesn't seem to have any effect on the demand. People are still buying Fortuners and bigger, right? So essentially, your lifetime utility out of a bigger vehicle far outweighs the one-time cost at the beginning. When you buy the vehicle, you're only paying tax one time, but you're going to enjoy the vehicle over 10 years. And that utility you derive from bigger vehicle over a 10-year period is much higher. And that's why people don't mind paying a little bit higher to buy. This is a usage-based tax. That was a one-time tax. And that is essentially, that's the fundamental.
Just to add something. So India typically has only two industries which are very competitive. One is pharmaceutical, the other one is automobile. The kind of offerings that Indian automobile industry provides, it's actually, despite the taxes, it's a very good deal that they give to customers, and that's why they still, despite 20% taxes, they sell so many cars. It's because the industry is so competitive.
Pranav, can you get your slides on?
So I need to join again, right?
Competition
It's a very competitive industry.
low cost in the company side, which is why exactly most taxes.
So,
Yeah, so
Vivek,
if you
Vivek, can we
compare-
avoid Zoom and just have the slides on?
Indian subcontinent.
I can
just avoid Zoom.
Yeah.
Despite 5.
But then you'll have to.
The people who were on Zoom before that, yeah, this is bad. If you run down, get a key, it's a subset of that's a
There we go.
So, one of the students wants to speak to you later.
Sure.
Maybe 5 o'clock or something?
Yeah, or I don't know what's scheduled right after this, but right now.
I'd ask some other students.
But 5 o'clock, I'll text you the.
In our computer science. Sorry, slides are up. Okay, we can just start again.
Yeah. It's only maybe another 5 minutes.
Germany has, what Germany does is,
Can you just come back and
they
slide
have a very much simpler tax policy. What they do is, when you're buying a car, what they do is, they'll calculate the distance from your home to your office, and on the basis of that, they'll charge the road tax.
Oh man, I see.
It's a much simpler way of approaching about yeah.
But that also
that's not very accurate.
Correct. I think one of the things that again ties back to something that I said at the beginning is that we now have the technology
Yeah, exactly.
to track people at the moment of entry into a road and moment of exit. So you can really charge people by the time they spend on a particular stretch of road, as opposed to crude measures like, okay, everybody pays the same amount or whatever, which
Are you
seems.
going to charge us walking around on the road as well?
Sorry?
Same principle, if you walk on the road, then the price.
Well, it will be much lower, clearly, right? So if you just do it by footprint, right, it will be much lower, and you can sort of potentially go make it arbitrarily close to zero.
I think the costs we pay by walking on road is the risk that we take.
There we go.
We don't have footprints. So
There we go. Right? So this is sort of a way to model something.
We'll have to wrap up.
Sure. Oh, there's a class, another class. Yeah. And so the point is that you can think of sort of variations on this tax where the function doesn't have to be linear. Right? It could be sort of convex in the size, or in the footprint, or in the time you spend. Right? And of course it can vary with time. Right? So it could be like an instantaneous price that is set as a function of instantaneous supply and instantaneous demand. And then you can ask these questions around, like, what do these look like in equilibrium, right? Or how much do they improve the transit times, right? How much? What is the difference between sort of status quo versus right? And finally, how does this change behavior? In particular, how does this change the mix of vehicles on the road? Right? Which in my mind is a very interesting question, which as far as I know has not been looked at. Right? So the choice people have is what vehicle to drive on any given day or in response to traffic conditions. And if you had congestion tax, how would that affect the choice of vehicle? And finally, I just want to spend a minute talking about this interplay between how technology improvement, in the case of electric vehicles, in the case of sensors required to track traffic movement, in the case of solar panels, and so on. In a lot of cases, there is this sort of virtuous cycle between technology improvement, which enables new product innovation. And that new product innovation then gets adopted by the market. And in all of this, you sort of have the possibility of policy intervention. Right? So you can have policies that incentivize technological improvement, you have policies that enable product innovation. And finally, you can have policies, and a lot of these around electric vehicles, there have been very useful, sort of very, very well thought out policies put together by the government to encourage EV adoption, right? And maybe something similar could be done for the congestion problem, right? And so that was the